And welcome back. It's that time again. Good vibes time. I'm Martin Falson, joining us as always. The beautiful, vivacious Debbie Cox DeNova. Debbie, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right, boy. You went through some weather the other day.
I did, yeah.
All right, but you made it through.
I'm here.
All right, good deal. All right, so this is going to be a great one, folks. This is going to be a good one.
hmm
Releasing trapped emotions.
Yes.
Woo!
hmm
All right, that's a five-parter.
It could be. It
All
actually
right,
could be.
okay.
So, trapped emotions. We've talked about emotions a lot, and emotions are healthy and they're there for us to experience different states. But what happens when they get trapped in our nervous system is that they can cause all sorts of issues, mental and emotional, and certainly physical ailments that can come over a long haul. So today we're going to talk about how to release through those emotions and why specifically human beings have an issue with storing and trapping emotions in the body, okay? So first it's important to understand that there are, according to the polyvagal theory, that there are three states of the nervous system, okay? You have the freeze state, which is the most primitive one, all right? When freeze is like, you ever noticed an animal, like if they can't get out, if they can't fight or fly
Yeah,
away,
yeah.
they'll just play dead, right? Or they'll
Mhm,
freeze, right?
mhm.
So that's the most primitive one. Now, above that, you have, and that they call the dorsal vagal, okay, state. Above that, you have the fight or flight. That's when the sympathetic nervous system, and just as a reminder, we have two arms of the autonomic nervous system, which is that all the automatic systems of the body, the digestion, the breathing, all of that. We have the sympathetic, which is that state of arousal, okay? And then we have parasympathetic, which is often called rest and digest, or feed and breed, as some people call it, right?
Mhm.
And so in the aroused state, the sympathetic state, you have fight or flight. So that's when you see either I'm going at you if there's a threat, a perceived threat, or I'm running away.
Right.
Okay. Now this like the healthiest state to be in for most of the time is the safety state of ventral vagal. In that you can actually be excited, you can be happy, you can be, calm.
Mhm.
It's the safest state to be. And the healthiest people will actually be able to go between those states quite quickly, and they'll spend most of their time in that ventral vagal state, that safety state.
Why do they call it vagal? Is that because it's controlled by the vagus nerve?
Yeah, it has to do with the
Yeah.
vagus nerve, which we've spoken a lot
Mhm.
about. And basically, what you want is to have a healthy, you don't want to stay all the time. There are certain circumstances where it's actually very appropriate for you to run, to
Mhm.
fight,
Like a
right?
bear's chasing you, run.
Yeah, and then for example, let's talk about anger, because anger is a big one that a lot of people struggle with, right? Where anger becomes rage for them. In certain states, and we know that anger is there to inform us that our standards and our boundaries have been violated. So in certain instances, it is very appropriate for anger to come up and say, "No, you're not going to do that." Somebody's coming at you or your child, it's important for you to have that anger
Mhm.
come up so that you can do something in the moment. Now, sometimes what happens is, especially as children, we go into a state of anger, but we are told or we experience that we're not safe to express that anger in the moment. So let's say, for example, that, and I'm just going to come up with something right off the top of my head. You have a toy that's your favorite toy,
Mhm.
and a little boy comes up and decides that he wants the toy and he
Mhm.
snatches it from you. And anger rises up because you want your toy back, but then you turn and your mother says, "You need to share." And actually punishes you or gives you negative feedback for the anger that you're
Mhm.
experiencing, and now you have to experience that this little boy just snatched your toy and gets to play with it, and there's nothing to be done about it. Now,
Mhm.
what can happen is that anger then gets stored in the nervous system, and this is when it becomes problematic, because anger in and of itself is a good, if you're experiencing it in a healthy way,
Mhm.
it's a good thing to protect your boundaries. But if you store it in your nervous system, and also a lesson that expressing anger in these certain situations is not appropriate and I'm not supposed to do it, is that you can then have it reactivated in your system in seemingly innocuous situations,
Mhm.
right? So you're exploding years later because someone was late for a meeting, or you're
It
exploding
rears
because
its ugly head
it,
in other situations.
it does. And the reason it's doing that is because it's not processed. The original thing is not processed. And unfortunately, let's just say that happened at age 5. You would
Mhm.
think, okay, well, now as an adult, I can evaluate what happened and experience it differently. But unfortunately, when you're thinking back on it, what you're doing is actually experiencing it from the 5-year-old's perspective again.
Right.
Right. So we have to be able to process this in a healthy way. And we're going to talk about how to get it out of the system.
Is that what they call arrested development?
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
you're basically stuck in your nervous system. You're stuck in that 5-year-old
Hmm.
for that particular thing. You're stuck from the 5-year-old's perspective in this disempowerment state. Okay. So what you have over time, depending on what happens and how you deal with it, is you have chronic states of emotion that are meant to be transient and are supposed to be expressed healthy in the moment.
Hmm.
So if you are somebody who felt helpless in a certain situation, you shut down, then that can show up as exhaustion, numbness, disassociation,
Hmm.
depression,
Hmm.
right? If you're somebody who got stuck in that sympathetic response, you can be somebody who's really highly anxious,
Hmm.
hypervigilant, hyperactive, fidgety, that
Hmm.
and just you know, stuck in that chronic state. And so what we want to do is give yourself the ability to process through the emotions in a healthy way, because all of nature really, like if you really watch animals do this quite naturally. And after the break I can tell you about a study where they were actually researching polar bears, and something that they caught on film that actually points to how animals easily process a buildup of negative emotions in the system, and it helps them to move forward cleanly without it being trapped in their nervous system. But
Oh, yeah, because I've never seen a polar bear smoking a cigarette.
right. We're seeing a therapist.
Or drinking some Jack Daniels or whatever.
Right.
That's pretty cool. I learned at an early age, don't try to negotiate with dad not to cut it too short.
Hmm.
Because if we got too strong with it, it was shorter.
Hmm.
So we learned real quick. But it's funny now because I go to the stylist and I say, cut it short. Was that a learned behavior or is that just preference?
It could be preference. It's something for sure that you could explore and see if there's a negative pattern of reactivation of negative fear-based emotion.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we want to look at it, because that's trauma, right? So
Mm-hmm.
fear that gets sort of stuck in the nervous system and is reactivated in different scenarios later on down the line, that we consider trauma. If it's just, you know what, it's a preference,
Yeah,
so there's no
I have no
dysregulation.
emotion with it. It's just I was wondering if it goes back to the high chair. You
It could.
know?
So it's not always trauma, and it may not always be problematic. It's when
Yeah.
you have a dysregulated nervous system and you have having a hard time regulating it or understanding, and it's
Mm.
disrupting your life. So at this point, it's actually something that is not serving you anymore. Anger would serve you in the moment, right? But then it becomes maladaptive later on if it's coming up and it's actually disrupting your life.
Mhm.
And so before the break, we talked about Peter Levine, who is the creator of the somatic experience theory, and he references an experience where researchers were actually doing some research on polar bears. They chased down a polar bear, high speed chase, and they
Mm.
actually shot it with a dart. And the polar bear was out and helpless to do anything about it as they did all the research.
Mhm.
When the polar bear was coming to, what they have recorded is this polar bear violently shaking before he gets up, completely shaking off all of the adrenaline, all of the cortisol that was coming up with the run,
Mhm.
all of the experiences of not being able to do anything, violently shaking the body. And then the polar bear gets up and walks away like nothing happened. Now, that's what animals often do. We often see these
Mhm.
scuffles with these two ducks, right? And
Mhm.
then they shake off their feathers and they float away quite calmly.
Right.
Now, the human beings are no different. We need to process
Mhm.
through all of those neurochemicals. The problem is that we have this huge cortex that often gets in the way. So we tell
Mhm.
ourselves that's too embarrassing, like don't cry,
Right.
or it's not appropriate for you to do this. And especially if you have had an experience as a child where you were told certain things were inappropriate, you might actually reason, okay, well, I can't do this. And then you're stuck with an experience where a lot of people are intellectually bypassing. So they're actually, using that intellectual part to bypass feeling into the emotions. And what we really need to do is get you to experience the emotions in a healthy way as your adult self.
Mm.
Okay. So
Mhm.
for somebody who is stuck, for example, in that dorsal vagal mode where they're numbed out, they're checked out, they're depressed, they're in a low state, what we need is to get them back in their bodies in a safe way.
Mhm.
So that can be like patting the legs, that can be like stomping the feet, actually getting up. You can see some people who've experienced trauma, and they talk about being angry, but they look very, very disconnected from their anger. It's like,
Mhm.
their heads down. They're in that freeze, they're stuck in that freeze
Mhm.
state, right? But they're talking about anger. We need to get them into their body so they can actually experience the emotions that are stuck in their nervous
So
system.
the ones that do better are the ones that know how to morph from one to the other more fluidly.
More fluidly, quickly, yeah, in a healthy way. And look, if you have had some deep trauma, it is definitely in your best interest to go find a therapist who works somatically with the body to help you through this, because sometimes you can bring yourself into a heightened state. So if you have rage issues, and like I know the late Steve Jobs was a big proponent of scream therapy. So he would go behind his property in Stanford, and he would just scream at the top of his lungs. Well, for some people, that's actually going to activate more rage within themselves. So we want to make sure that you're doing something that is effective for you. So getting yourself in the body, dancing, kind of invigorating yourself can bring somebody who's in a dorsal vagal state up into their body so they can process the emotion. If you're already in a heightened state though, if you're already in that sympathetic state and you're hypervigilant, what you want to do is calm down. So now we are activating the vagus nerve. So we're doing the deep breathing, right? We're making sure that we are coming into calm states. You can do anything like swimming or yoga, anything that puts you in a rhythmic breathing state. And what you want to do is be with, instead of expressing the emotion in a negative way, which is going to happen. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're flipping them off, you're screaming at them. That's you reactivating that rage, right? Instead of doing that, going into a safe space where you actually are experiencing the emotion and where it came from, and reminding yourself that you're safe, that happened to you before, that it's not your fault that it happened, that you're safe. And again, it can be very helpful to work with a professional psychiatrist or a therapist if it's deep trauma.
I always categorize things like if somebody cuts you off in traffic, I go road bump. Not a big,
Yes.
not a big deal.
If
In
you can
15
assume the
minutes,
best.
we won't, or someone dented your car. 2 days from now, you're not even going to be worried about it.
Yes.
So categorize road bump, road bump, road bump. When something big happens, then you address it, but don't let the road bump become the big thing.
Exactly. Giving, it's that going back to that generosity of spirit. Like you generous with your friends and assume the best of them. And when you do that with strangers, you might be wrong. They might actually be cutting you off. But at the end of the day, it always roots back to something that is not actually personal to you, right? And maybe they have cake in the car and they're going really slow or whatever it is.
Right.
But whatever it is, it's always good to actually prioritize your vibrational experience. So your nervous system, it's not worth it for you to continue to reactivate. What we want to do is get into a healthy state, connect to people, and serve your best interest.
That's a great topic. We're going to have to readdress this.
Yes.
Because I bet a lot of people are watching, because everybody has had to deal with trapped emotions somewhere.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Great topic. We appreciate it. We're out of time. Bye. See you next week.